All right, today we're going to run through supply and demand curves. As we look here, let's go over some of the basic information so that you understand what you are looking at when you look at a supply and demand graph. On the y-axis, you're going to see actually the price. So the price is actually going to increase as you go up the y-axis. The quantity is on the x-axis, so if you look at that, the price is actually going to go up as well. We are looking at quadrant 1 if you're more of a math-related person on a graph. What is a demand curve? Well, a demand curve is downward sloping. Why is it downward sloping? It's downward sloping because of the law of demand. It is an inverse relationship, as the price goes down, the quantity goes up. And as the price goes up, the quantity goes down. Just think about this about buying things. If prices are low, then you're going to want to buy more items. Here's a supply curve. It's upward sloping, finished with the S on the end. The supply curve is actually a parallel relationship between price and quantity. So as the price goes up, the quantity also goes up. So where they actually meet is what we're going to call the equilibrium, or the market clearing price. So at this point, the market will actually be cleared. Okay, so let's move on. So not ever are we really in equilibrium. Most of the time we're in disequilibrium. What is disequilibrium? That's where we are actually outside of that X mark. So our supply and our demand curve form at X. But in this case, there's our equilibrium. In this case, we are actually going to set the price at $5. So we're going to go over till we hit our first curve, which is a supply curve. So at $5, we actually supply 5 items. But at $5, we demand 5 items. So this gap is what we call a shortage. A shortage is where you go to the stores and they don't have enough of it. Think of it when you hit the grocery store and you want that Coke, or you want that milk, or whatever it might be, and you actually go to the store and you can't find it. This is what we call a shortage. All right, so the opposite is also true. So let's run through our demand curve, our supply curve, the point in the middle. Now let's set our price at $15. So at $15, the first curve we come to is a demand curve. At $15, we actually demand 5 items, but we're willing to supply 15 items. This actually gives us a surplus of 10 items. So what is a surplus? A surplus is basically where there's more items on the shelf than what we can sell. This, and how do you get rid of a surplus? This is pretty easy. This is what you do when you go to a store. So during the clothing season, if the clothing lines are getting ready to close up because it's no longer winter or no longer summer and they still have those clothes on the shelves, what do they do to them? They lower the price. They have to get rid of them. Now, we've already kind of talked about price floors and price ceilings, so I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. A price ceiling is where the government actually comes in and fixes the price and says you cannot sell the item above this price. The price wants to go above that price, but it cannot. This example would be like rent control. This actually creates a natural shortage. So the government says you can't charge more than this amount. They actually should be able to charge more than that, but they can't. So there's a shortage of items. So price floor is the opposite. So we got our demand and our supply. That's our equilibrium. This is where the government says you cannot sell below $15. So in this case, the price wants to go down, but it is stopped. This is basically like minimum wage. Workers want to pay people as little as they possibly can, but we're not willing to work for that much. So therefore, this creates a natural surplus. So in this case of minimum wage, if the price goes up, there's actually more workers than there is demand of jobs. All right, so that's basically the idea of minimum wage. All right, so let's run through increases in demand. So here's your demand curve. Here's our supply curve. Where they meet is the equilibrium. Now there's all those different factors that can shift. So demographics, advertising, expectations, or population. Let's say that there is an increase in population in your city. Now, if there's an increase in population in your city, it actually shifts your demand curve, so it moves it to the right, which now, if you don't increase the price, creates a natural shortage. Okay, you are below the equilibrium. So how do you get rid of that equilibrium or the shortage? You actually have to find the new equilibrium, so you have to raise the price to actually do that. So with an increase in population, or maybe you start advertising for your product, or income goes up, any of these items will cause the increase to the right, which will cause prices to go up, and will also increase your supply and your quantity. All right, so let's run through demand. So that's your supply and demand, and you have a decrease in your demand, again, because of maybe population, income, demographics. Maybe now all of a sudden you have people that leave your city. If that's the case, then now you're actually going to get a decrease in your demand or move to the left. And at $10, you're going to see we're above the new equilibrium, which is going to cause a shortage. So how do we get rid of that shortage? We have to lower the price. Okay, let's run through increases in supply. So this will also be the same thing as increase in demand, except you're not shifting the demand curve. You're actually going to shift the supply curve. There's my equilibrium. Let's increase or shift to the right. And now we have a new supply curve. So if you don't change the price, that's actually going to create, or above the equilibrium, which is going to create a surplus. So how do we lower that surplus or get rid of that surplus? We have to actually lower the price. This is due to rising costs, taxes, regulations, subsidies, global issues, something along those lines. It's going to cause us to change the supply for a product. So how much we're producing. Let's run through the last one here. All right, so a decrease in supply, and here's our demand curve. Supply curve upward sloping. This is our market equilibrium, or our equilibrium price. A decrease in supply is going to be a shift to the left. As you notice, it does go up. So that's my new supply curve. And we are actually below the new equilibrium, which is going to cause a shortage. All right. So again, with a decrease in supply, going to create a shortage. What do we have to do? We have to raise prices to get rid of that shortage. So with a decrease in supply, you're actually going to get a decrease in demand and an increase in price. All right, so that's it for this. I know I ran through it pretty quickly, but hopefully you can rewatch the video if you don't quite understand supply and demand and how prices work.